Welcome back to the December County Connections. Again, I'm Scott, that's Karn, Thomas, and Dan, your county commissioners and your county manager. So we're going to talk now about another big issue within Summit County, and that is our Summit County Resource Allocation Park. And it's some financial issues that it's facing and its impact on recycling and our operation of the landfill going forward. So Karn, you want to kick us off on that one?
Sure. Many of you were at a meeting that we had just last week, and it was an amazing turnout. 150 or so people showed up at the community center. So it just shows the passion that people have for recycling, and that was the main impetus. But really what we tried to explain is that it's a much bigger picture. It's SCRAP, Summit County Resource Allocation Park, and it's named that because it's a great acronym, but also it really is one utility that works together. And so if many people have been up there, and you can see piles and piles of compost up there. You can take up your household hazardous waste at any point in time, as well as trash and recycling. But the drop-off centers have been really important for people to recycle, and we have dedicated recyclers here. And unfortunately, we have this paradigm problem throughout the country. It's not just us, but recycling is not free, and it's funded by the cost of trash. So we're paying for our recycling through the tipping fees or the fees that you pay if you go up to the landfill to dispose of trash. So we have one hauler taking about 30% of the volume out of the county, and that has created a crisis in our budget. So we're looking at ways to fix this and looking at it as a utility where this is something the community has invested in for many, many decades. The county took over this facility when initially it was just a dump that people used like they did back in the 30s and 40s. You just dump things in the rivers.
And in this case, we were dumping it on Forest Service land.
Right. And so through a series of changes, the county took over and basically had to deal with the sins of the past, a big mess of pollution there. And so it's been a very costly landfill to run. But at this point in time, it really is functioning beautifully until we had this budget crisis that we're trying to deal with now. So we're working with the haulers, trying to come up with some solutions to keep them using our community facility, and that supports all of the programs.
Other comments?
Well, Karn, you were at the community meeting. How many people showed up for that?
It was wonderful to see so many people showing up at 9 a.m. on a weekday. Filled the place. We had to open up another room. So a lot of passion to keep this functioning as it has been.
I think that HC3, the High Country Conservation Center, has been doing a great job of getting out there and explaining this situation, explaining why this is so important to the recycling programs that people like so much. I mean, it's a pretty simple financial calculation for us. The waste disposed funds, the recycling centers and the recycling program, we can't continue the recycling program without being able to rely upon collections of the trash hauled. And so that's what we're up against. Thankfully, even the U.S. Supreme Court has said, yes, in a situation like what Summit County government has, you're a utility, and you can require people to use the utility that you invested many millions of dollars to create to provide the place for discarding your trash. So that is what we're pursuing. Thankfully, most of the towns are with us on this. And so we do have a plan. We're communicating the plan. And just want to say thanks again to High Country Conservation Center for all of their assistance and all of their help.
Yeah, and I will reiterate one of the comments that Karn made. We are working hard to try to engage with the haulers within the community to try to come up with an agreement or an ordinance that is palatable to the haulers as well as to the county, and will allow the scrap to continue to operate at a high level with a very strong level of environmental sensitivity as well. And so far we've had good, positive, encouraging conversations with those haulers, and we'll continue to have those conversations going forward. It's important to understand that the issue is not exclusive to recycling. So the dollars that are coming in are needed not only to help to subsidize the recycling operations, but they are required in order for us to operate the landfill at the level that we do today. And if those revenues decrease significantly, which is what's happened here over the course of the last 6 months or so, it's impossible for us to maintain the operations at the landfill at the same level that we've become accustomed to, and that really is required for us to maintain the environmental stewardship that's appropriate for that site. And so that's the other very big component of this issue. So it's not just recycling, but it's the operation of that landfill itself. And what we've done from a budget standpoint so far this year is we've said that we're going to have to cut back on recycling services because those are subsidized heavily by the landfill operation. And we've also had to eliminate all of the capital related projects at the landfill in 2017. And those are not things that we can sustain long term and continue to have a functional landfill within our community. In addition to that, the landfill, we've heard from folks that with the idea of, well, just shut the landfill down and have everybody take their trash out, which in some regards makes some sense because, how much trash do we really want here in Summit County? The unfortunate reality is that we cannot just turn the switch off at the landfill. We have a long-term obligation and we have expenses associated with closure and what's called post-closure of that facility. So we can't just simply turn the lights off and go home. We have to build up a fund reserve to be able to deal with that 30-year post-closure activity.
Right.
And right now we're not in a position to be able to do that because we have not expected that tomorrow we're going to close the landfill. We don't expect to close the landfill based on filling up its airspace for 40 or 50 or more years down the road. And so we've been expecting and assuming that over time we'll build that reserve up as we go from now until several decades from now, and actually are going to close that landfill. We would also hope that in the interim that there are much different ways that we approach solid waste within our communities, within the country, and that we don't end up actually having a landfill that's closing in 50 years, but rather we're closing a landfill in 200 years, or we're bringing very little solid waste to the landfill going forward, and that model has changed dramatically.
Right. When you talk to the guy, Aaron Byrne, our director up at the scrap, is just outstanding in what he does. And when he goes to a conference, and there was a conference here recently in Keystone, and I did the introductory comments, but if you look at what they're talking about, over the next 10, 20 years, they're going to try to figure out how to get a lot more things out of the waste stream and into some sort of reuse or recycling stream, right? So that's where we're headed long term. And I agree with Scott. We want that landfill to last for 200 years, not another 50.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more that I think is just going to change across our country with regards to what do we do with the things that we don't have a use for. And burying them in the ground is what we do a lot of now, but in the future, there's probably a more responsible, environmentally appropriate way to reuse, recycle, reduce.
I think in 50 years, we'll look back like we do now at what was going on in the 30s, where people were just dumping into rivers, and we'll see what we're doing now and how silly it was.
Yeah.
But this is where we are now, and there needs to be a whole new paradigm. But in the meantime, what we're doing is protecting water quality, and that's one of the biggest issues. Is many of these landfills that are not run well are just leachade toxins into rivers and aquifers. And so we're doing the responsible thing here. Many of the landfills in Colorado are not so well maintained.
Yeah.
So again, thanks very much for all the folks that came to the community forum that the Summit Daily News had organized. Thanks to HC3, thanks to the haulers, Timberline and Waste Management that had representatives that sat on a panel at that meeting as well. And we'll continue the dialogue with those haulers, but also with the community. And we look forward to coming up with a solution that's satisfactory to everybody at the table. So, all right, we'll take a quick break. We'll come back for our final segment.